Captain Minho Park stood on the bridge of the cargo ship Hanul's Dream, watching the empty space through the main window. Stars dotted the darkness like tiny diamonds, but out here in the void sector, they seemed cold and distant. Most ships avoided this area. It was dangerous, empty, and far from any trade routes that could make money. "Captain, we're getting something strange," said Yuna Kim, the chief engineer. She was sitting at her station, frowning at the screen in front of her. "It looks like a distress signal, but it's very weak." Minho walked over to her station. The crew of 12 had been together for 3 years now, carrying cargo from one planet to another. They were not a military ship or a rescue vessel. They were just people trying to make a living in space. But Minho had always believed that space was big enough to be lonely without ignoring people who needed help. "How weak?" he asked, looking at the dancing lines on Yuna's screen. "Very weak. I almost missed it. The signal is old too. Maybe weeks, maybe months." Yuna pressed some buttons and the sound became a little clearer. "It's in a language our computer doesn't know very well." Tail Song, the first officer, came over to listen. He was young but smart, and Minho trusted his judgment. "Can we understand any of it?" Yuna worked on the signal for several minutes. The computer tried to match the words with languages in its memory. Finally, some words appeared on the screen in basic English. "Food gone, power failing, anyone, please." The bridge became quiet. Everyone could understand what those words meant. Somewhere in the empty darkness of space, someone was dying slowly, hoping that anyone would hear their call for help. "What language is it?" Minho asked. "The computer thinks it's Velthari," Yuna said. "But that can't be right. The Velthari disappeared 200 years ago. Everyone knows they're extinct." Minho had heard of the Velthari. They had been a proud race with advanced technology. They had looked down on humans and other younger species, calling them primitive and stupid. When they disappeared, most people thought they had just moved to another part of the galaxy, where they wouldn't have to deal with lesser beings. "Captain," said Narration from the communications station, "I'm getting coordinates from the signal. It's coming from a location about 3 days away from our current route." Minho looked at the star map. 3 days meant fuel, time, and money. Their cargo was due at Kepler Station in 10 days, and the company that hired them would not be happy about delays. But as he stared at the translated message on the screen, he could not stop thinking about someone floating alone in space, waiting for help that might never come. "Sir," Tail said quietly, "if it really is Velthari, they probably wouldn't want our help anyway. They always thought humans were beneath them." "Maybe," Minho said. "But if someone is dying out there, does it matter what they think of us?" The bridge crew exchanged looks. They all knew their captain was a good man, but this decision could cost them money and put them in danger. The void sector was empty for good reasons. Ships that came here sometimes never came back. Hyuk Lim, the security chief, spoke up. "Captain, we don't know what we might find. It could be a trap. Pirates sometimes use fake distress signals to attack cargo ships." "That's possible," Minho agreed. "But how many pirates know how to speak ancient Velthari, and who would expect a cargo ship to be way out here?" Dr. Solahan, the ship's doctor, had been listening quietly. She was a calm woman who rarely spoke unless she had something important to say. "Captain, if someone has been surviving on a damaged ship for weeks or months, they will need medical help quickly. Even if we find them alive, they might not stay that way much longer." Minho walked back to the main window and looked out at the stars. He thought about his crew, his ship, and his responsibility to deliver the cargo on time. Then he thought about the message. "Anyone, please." Someone out there had sent those words into the darkness, hoping that someone would care enough to help. "Yuna," he said, turning back to his engineer, "how much fuel would it cost to change course?" 3 days there, time to search and maybe help. 3 days back to our original route, Yuna calculated. Maybe 4 days total delay, and about 15% more fuel than planned. "That means we'll be cutting it close on our delivery deadline," Tail warned. "I know," Minho said. He looked around at his crew. These people had followed him through dangerous situations before. They trusted him to make good decisions. but I can't ignore a distress call. If we were the ones floating out there hoping someone would hear us, wouldn't we want them to come? The crew was quiet for a moment. Then Nari spoke up. I agree with the captain. We should go. Me too, said Dr. Sola. One by one, the other crew members nodded their agreement. Even Hayuk, who was always worried about security, finally said, All right, but we go in carefully. Minho felt proud of his crew. They were good people who understood that sometimes doing the right thing was more important than making money. Yuna, set course for those coordinates, best speed. Yes, Captain, Yuna said, and began working at her station. As the Hanul's dream changed direction and headed toward the unknown, Minho wondered what they would find. Would they arrive too? Late? Would they find an empty ship floating in space? Or would they find something else entirely? He did not know that their decision to answer this call would change not just their lives, but the way the entire galaxy looked at the human race. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with just deciding to care about someone else, even when it would be easier to look away. The stars ahead looked the same as always, but now they were heading toward hope instead of just another delivery. 3 days later, the Hanul's dream arrived at the coordinates from the distress signal. What they found floating in the darkness made everyone on the bridge stare in amazement. The ship was huge, easily 5 times larger than their cargo vessel. Its design was unlike anything they had seen before. The hull was smooth and curved, made of a dark metal that seemed to absorb light. Strange symbols covered the surface, and even though the ship was clearly damaged, it still looked beautiful and advanced. That's definitely Velthari, whispered Nari from her station. I've seen pictures in history books, but seeing one in real life is incredible. Yuna ran scans of the alien vessel. Captain, the ship is mostly dead. I'm reading minimal power. Life support systems are failing and there's no engine activity, but... She paused, checking her readings again. There's one life sign. Just one. Dr. Sola asked, moving closer to look at the scans. Yes, very weak, but definitely alive. The signal is coming from what looks like the medical section of the ship. Captain Minho studied the massive vessel through the window. Any signs of weapons or defenses? Hyuk checked his security readings. Nothing active, Captain. If they had weapons, they don't have power to use them now. All right, Minho decided. We're going over. Sola, Hyuk, you're with me. Everyone else, keep the ship ready in case we need to leave quickly. The 3 of them put on their spacesuits and took a small shuttle over to the alien ship. Finding an airlock took time because Velthari designs were so different from human ones. When they finally got inside, emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls. The corridors were tall and narrow, built for beings that were taller and thinner than humans. Everything was elegant but cold, with smooth surfaces and flowing lines. Their footsteps echoed in the empty halls as they followed Sola's medical scanner toward the life sign. Look at this, Hyuk said, stopping at a large room filled with glass pods. Each pod was the size of a bed, and most of them were dark and empty. A few still had bodies inside, but the systems keeping them alive had failed long ago. Stasis pods, Sola said sadly. They were trying to keep people alive until rescue came. But rescue never came. They counted 37 pods total. 36 had failed. Only one in the corner still had power, and its occupant was barely alive. As they moved deeper into the ship, they began to understand what had happened. This was not a warship or a cargo vessel like theirs. It was a research ship, filled with laboratories and equipment for studying space. Computer screens showed star charts and calculations that none of them could understand. They were exploring, Minho said, looking at one of the star maps. This was a science mission. And something went very wrong, Hayuk added, pointing to damaged sections of the ship they had passed. The medical bay was near the center of the ship. When they entered, they found more failed equipment and empty medicine containers. In the back corner, one medical pod was still working, though its lights were dim and flickering. Inside the pod was a Velthari. She was tall and thin, just as the stories described, with pale blue skin and long white hair. Her face was angular and sharp, and even unconscious, she looked proud and intelligent. But she was also clearly dying. The pod systems were failing, and she was very thin from years of surviving on minimal nutrition. How long has she been like this? Minho asked. Sola checked the medical pod's records, though the alien writing was hard to understand. Based on the power consumption and medical data, I think she's been alone for over 100 years. Maybe longer. 100 years? Yuk said in amazement. How is she still alive? Velthari live longer than humans, Sola explained. And this medical pod has been keeping her alive, but just barely. She should have died decades ago. As they stood around the pod, the Velthari's eyes suddenly opened. They were large and silver, and they fixed on the three humans with a mixture of confusion and fear. She tried to speak, but only weak sounds came out. Sola immediately began checking the pod settings. She's awake, but very weak. We need to get her to our ship quickly if we want to save her. The Velthari tried to sit up, but she was too weak. Her silver eyes moved from one human to another, and they could see she was trying to understand what was happening. When Minho stepped closer, she made a sound that their translators picked up as no. It's all right, Minho said gently. We're here to help. We received your distress signal. The translator converted his words into Velthari language, but the alien woman looked even more confused. She spoke again, and this time the translator picked up more words. Humans? Impossible. Humans are inferior, cannot help. Despite her weakness, pride and disbelief filled her voice. Even dying alone in space, she found it hard to accept that humans would come to rescue her. Maybe we are inferior, Minho said, but we're here and you need help. That's what matters now. Sola was already preparing a portable life support unit. Captain, we need to move her now. The pod is failing and she won't survive much longer without better medical care. The Velthari woman tried to protest, but she was too weak to resist as they carefully moved her from the failing pod to their portable unit. As they carried her through the empty corridors of her ship, she kept looking around at the darkness and the failed systems. My crew, she whispered in her own language. My work, all lost. You're not lost, Minho told her. Not yet. Back on the Hanil's dream, they took the Velthari woman to the medical bay. Dr. Sola worked quickly to stabilize her condition, while the rest of the crew gathered around, curious but respectful. None of them had ever seen a living Velthari before. What's her name? Asked Yuna. Sola checked the translation unit. Kira Esh. She was the head scientist on that research ship. Kira Esh, Minho repeated, looking down at the unconscious alien. You're safe now. Even unconscious, Kira Esh looked troubled, as if her dreams were filled with doubt and confusion. She had spent over a century believing that humans were primitive beings unworthy of respect. Now those same beings had risked their lives and mission to save her. Captain, Tail said quietly. What do we do now? Where do we take her? Minho looked around at his crew. They had answered a distress call and saved a life, but now they had a responsibility. This woman was alone in the universe, the last survivor of her ship, possibly one of the last of her entire species. First, we help her get better, he said. Then we figure out the rest. Outside the medical bay window, the dead Velthari ship drifted in space, a monument to dreams and exploration that had ended in tragedy. But inside the Hanil's dream, those dreams had found new hope in the most unlikely place, the caring hands of the very species she had been taught to despise. Kira Esh woke up in a strange bed, in a strange room surrounded by the smell of unfamiliar air. For a moment she thought she was still dreaming. Then the memories came back. Her failing ship, the impossible sight of humans in spacesuits, and the feeling of being carried away from everything she had known for over a century. She tried to sit up, but her body was still weak. The room was small but clean, with white walls and soft lighting. Through a small window she could see stars moving slowly past. She was on a ship, but not her ship. The door opened, and a human woman entered. Kira Esh recognized her as the one who had worked on the medical equipment. The human spoke in their crude language, but a small device on the wall translated her words. You're awake. Good. I'm Dr. Solahan. How do you feel? Kira Esh stared at the human woman. Dr. Sola was smaller than any Velthari, with dark hair and kind eyes. She moved carefully as if she understood that Kira Esh might be frightened. Where am I? Kira Esh asked. Her voice was still weak, but the translator changed her words into human language. You're on our ship, the Hanul's Dream. You've been unconscious for 2 days. Your body was very weak from so many years in that medical pod. Kira Esh looked around the room again. It was clearly the best room on the ship, with comfortable furniture, and even some plants growing in small pots near the window. Why am I here? Because you needed help, Dr. Sola said simply. You sent a distress signal. We came. But I am Velthari. You are human. Your people are. Kira Esh stopped. She had been about to say primitive or inferior, but those words seemed wrong now. These humans had saved her life when her own people had left her to die. Dr. Sola seemed to understand what she was thinking. Your people and mine may be different, but that doesn't matter when someone needs help. Can I check your vital signs? Kira Esh allowed the examination, though she remained tense and suspicious. She had been taught from childhood that humans were a young, violent species with little intelligence and no culture. They were supposed to be greedy and selfish, caring only about themselves. But this Dr. Sola was gentle and careful. She explained everything she was doing and made sure Kira Esh was comfortable. When the examination was finished, she brought food and water. I had to guess what you could eat safely, Dr. Sola said. I found some nutrition supplies on your ship and tried to match them. Our cook, Jaewon, spent hours making sure it wouldn't poison you. Kira Esh ate slowly, watching the human doctor. Why do you help me? What do you want in return? Nothing, Dr. Sola said. We help because it's right. Over the following days, Kira Esh began to observe the humans more carefully. They had given her the captain's own quarters, forcing him to sleep in a smaller room. When she asked why, Captain Minho simply said, You're our guest. She watched through her window as crew members worked on repairs to her ship. They were not stripping it for valuable parts as she had expected. Instead, they were trying to fix it. Yuna Kim and a younger woman named Mira Shin spent hours studying Velthari technology, not to steal it, but to understand how to repair it. We thought you might want your ship working again, Yuna explained when Kira Esh asked. In case you want to continue your research. This confused Kira Esh more than anything. Her research had been abandoned by her own people over a century ago. Why would these primitive humans care about gravitational studies they could never understand? The communications officer, Nari Jeon, spent long hours improving the translation system so they could speak more easily. She never showed frustration when Kira Esh corrected her pronunciation or criticized the simple translations. Language is important, Nari said. If we can't understand each other properly, how can we really help? But it was the small things that affected Kira Esh most. She saw navigator Sunho Kang give half his dinner to security chief Hyuk Lim when Hyuk had to skip a meal for extra duty. She watched specialist Gina Wu spend her free time teaching basic mathematics to the younger crew members. She observed, Captain Minho refused a profitable cargo contract because it would delay their mission to help her. Captain, she heard First Officer Tail say, that contract would have paid enough to cover our fuel costs for this whole detour. Then we'll find another way to pay for fuel, Minho replied. We made a commitment to help Kira Esh. We keep our commitments. Most strange of all was the cook, Jaewon Ryu. Every day he brought her meals that were carefully prepared to match Velthari nutritional needs. He had spent his own money to buy special ingredients at their last port, just to make sure she had food that would help her recover. You don't need to do this, Kira Esh told him one day. Jaewon smiled. Good food helps healing. Besides, I like learning about different cuisines. You're teaching me something new. As her strength returned, Kira Esh began to move around the ship. The crew treated her with respect but not fear. They asked questions about her research and listened carefully to her answers. When she criticized their technology or methods, they didn't get angry. They asked how to do better. One evening, she found engineer Yuna Kim working late in the engine room. Yuna was studying data from the Velthari ship, trying to understand how their propulsion system worked. It's very different from ours, Yuna said when she noticed Kira Esh watching. Much more elegant. But I think our approach might be more reliable in some situations. You think human engineering is better than Velthari? Kira Esh asked, surprised. Not better. Different. We both solve the same problems, just in different ways. Maybe if we shared knowledge, both our people could learn something. That night, Kira Esh lay in her comfortable bed staring out at the stars. For over a century she had believed that her people were superior to all others. The Velthari were older, smarter, more advanced. Other species, especially humans, were beneath consideration. But these humans had proven her wrong in every way. They had answered her distress call when her own people had written her off as lost. They had shared their food, their space, their time. They had worked to repair her ship without being asked. They had treated her not as a primitive to be pitied, or a superior to be feared, but as a person worthy of respect. Most importantly, they had given her something she thought was lost forever: hope. Not just hope for survival, but hope for purpose. They believed her research was valuable. They thought her knowledge was worth preserving. For the first time since her ship had been stranded in space, Kira Esh began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong about more than just human nature. Maybe she had been wrong about what it truly meant to be civilized. Outside her window, the stars continued their ancient dance, but now they seemed less cold and distant. Now they seemed full of possibilities she had never imagined. 2 weeks after her rescue, Kira Esh sat in the observation deck of the Hanul's Dream, watching a bright star grow larger in the distance. They were approaching Kepler Station, a busy trading post where ships from dozens of different species came to trade goods and information. "We'll reach the station tomorrow," Captain Minho said, joining her at the window. "From there we can find transport to the Velthari colonies in the Andromeda sector." "My crew has been researching the routes." Kira Esh nodded but said nothing. She had been dreading this conversation. During her time on the human ship, she had learned that there were still Velthari alive, but not many. Most lived in small, isolated communities far from other species. They would welcome her back as a survivor, but what kind of life would that be? "Have you contacted them?" she asked. "We sent a message 3 days ago," Minho said gently. "The Velthari Council was surprised to hear that you were still alive. They had declared your research expedition lost over a century ago." Kira Esh had expected this, but it still hurt. "And my research?" "They said it was outdated. The gravitational studies you were working on have been abandoned. They said current Velthari science has moved in different directions." The words hit Kira Esh like a physical blow. Her life's work, the research that had driven her to explore the far reaches of space, was now considered worthless by her own people. She had spent 127 years in that medical pod, keeping herself alive partly through the hope that someone would value what she had discovered. "They will still welcome you home," Minho added. "You're a survivor, a piece of living history. They will take care of you." "As a curiosity," Kira Esh said bitterly, "an old scientist whose work no longer matters." They sat in silence for a while, watching the star grow brighter. Finally, Minho spoke again. "You know, Yuna and Gina have been studying your research notes. They don't understand all of it, but they think it's brilliant. They believe you were on the edge of discovering something important about how gravity works in deep space." Kira Esh looked at him in surprise. "They can barely understand basic Velthari mathematics. How could they judge my work? Maybe they can't understand all the details, but they understand the importance of what you were trying to do. They've been working on combining your gravitational theories with human engineering. They think it could lead to better space travel for everyone." "Humans would use Velthari science?" Kira Esh asked. "But your people have always developed their own technology." "We learn from everyone," Minho said. "That's how we've survived and grown. We take the best ideas from wherever we find them and make them better." Over the next few hours, Kira Esh walked through the ship, thinking about her future. In the engineering section, she found Yuna and Gina working on calculations based on her research. They had filled several screens with equations, some Velthari and some human. "Kira Esh," Gina said excitedly when she saw her, "we've been working on your gravity field equations. Look at this." The young human showed her a complex calculation that combined Velthari gravitational theory with human propulsion technology. It was crude and incomplete, but the basic idea was sound. More importantly, it was new. Her century-old research was being used to create something that had never existed before. "This could change everything," Yuna said. "Ships could travel faster and safer through areas of space that are dangerous now. Your work could save thousands of lives." "But this will take years to develop," Kira Esh said. "Maybe decades. So, good science takes time," Gina replied. "The important thing is that it's possible." That evening, Kira Esh joined the crew for dinner, as she had every night since recovering her strength. Cook Jaywin had prepared a special meal that combined human and Velthari cooking styles. As they ate, the conversation turned to their next cargo run after dropping her off. "We're taking supplies to the outer colonies," Teal explained. "Medical equipment, food, tools. The colonies always need basic supplies." "Dangerous work," added Hayek. "Pirates like to attack supply ships." "But necessary work," Dr. Sola said. "Those colonies depend on ships like ours." Kira Esch listened to them talk about their work with genuine passion. They weren't just moving cargo for money. They saw themselves as helping people, connecting distant worlds, making life better for those who needed it most. After dinner, Captain Minho asked to speak with her privately. They went to his small office, which he had given up so she could have better quarters. "Kira Esch," he said, "I have something to ask you, but I want you to know there's no pressure to say yes." She waited, curious about what could make this confident human captain seem nervous. "We've been talking as a crew," he continued, "and we would like to offer you a position as our science officer. Your knowledge, your research, your experience, they would be valuable to us. But more than that, we would be honored to have you as part of our family." Kira Esch stared at him in shock. "You want me to stay? With humans as crew? I know it sounds impossible. No Velthari has ever served with humans before. Your people might not understand. Other species might not accept it. But we believe you could do important work here. You could continue your research, help us understand the universe better, and maybe bridge the gap between our peoples." "I would be the first," Kira Esch said slowly. "You would be a pioneer, just like you were when you started your original research mission." Kira Esch thought about the choice before her. She could return to the Velthari colonies where she would be safe but forgotten, her work dismissed as obsolete. Or she could stay with these humans who valued her knowledge and wanted to help her continue her research. But it was more than that. These humans had shown her something she had never experienced before: acceptance without condition. They didn't care that she was different, or that she had once looked down on their species. They cared about her as a person, valued her mind, and wanted her to be part of their team. "If I stayed," she said carefully, "what would I do?" "Whatever you want," Minho said. "Continue your gravitational research. Help us understand alien technology. Study space phenomena. Teach us about Velthari science. Learn about human methods. The universe is big enough for all kinds of research." Kira Esch looked out the window at the approaching space station. Tomorrow she would have to choose between the safety of returning to her own people and the unknown adventure of staying with the humans who had saved her life. For the first time in over a century, she was no longer just surviving. She was living, and these humans were offering her the chance to keep living, to keep discovering, to keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course, take all the time you need." But even as she said it, Kira Esch knew in her heart that she had already made her choice. These humans had given her back her purpose. Now they were giving her back her future. 6 months later, Kira Esch stood on the bridge of the Hanul's Dream, wearing a modified human uniform with her own Velthari symbols added to the sleeves. She was no longer a passenger or a rescued survivor. She was Science Officer Kira Esch, the first Velthari to serve alongside humans in the history of both species. "Approaching the Helix Nebula, Captain," announced Navigator Sunho from his station. "The gravitational readings are exactly what Kira Esch predicted." Captain Minho smiled as he watched the beautiful swirls of colored gas and dust fill the main screen. "Take us in carefully, Sunho. Let's see if our new navigation system works as well as Kira Esch says it will." The new system was a combination of Velthari gravitational science and human engineering. Over the past months, Kira Esch had worked closely with Yuna and Gina to create something neither species could have built alone. It allowed ships to navigate through dangerous areas of space by reading and using gravitational currents instead of fighting them. "Navigation system is working perfectly," Yuna reported from the engineering station. "We're saving 40% on fuel consumption and moving faster than any ship has ever moved through this nebula." "Excellent," Minho said. "Kira Esch, this is your discovery. How does it feel to see it work?" Kira Esch looked around the bridge at her human colleagues, her friends and family now. "It feels like coming home," she said simply. The past 6 months had not been easy. When news spread that a Velthari scientist was working with humans, it caused shock throughout the galaxy. Many Velthari were angry and embarrassed. They said Kira Esch was betraying her own species by associating with inferior beings. Other species were equally surprised, but for different reasons. If the proud Velthari were willing to work with humans, maybe humans weren't as primitive as everyone thought. Trade delegations began approaching human colonies. Scientific conferences invited human researchers. For the first time, humans were being treated as equals by the older, more advanced species. "Captain," Nari called from communications. "We're receiving a message from the Altair Research Station. Dr. Veltar wants to speak with Kira Ish." Kira Ish felt her heart skip a beat. Dr. Veltar was one of the most respected scientists in Velthari society. She had also been one of Kira Ish's harshest critics, calling her work with humans a disgrace to our species. "Put him through," Kira Ish said. The main screen switched to show an elderly Velthari male with the traditional scientific robes of their people. His expression was serious but not hostile. "Kira Ish," he said in formal Velthari. "I hope you are well." "I am very well, Dr. Veltar."
"How may I help you?"
"I am calling to apologize and to ask for your help." The word seemed difficult for him to say. "We have been studying the reports of your gravitational navigation system. The applications are significant. We would like to invite you to present your research at the Grand Science Assembly next month." Kira Ish was stunned. The Grand Science Assembly happened only once every 10 years. It was the most important scientific gathering in Velthari society. Being invited to present was the highest honor a scientist could receive. "I am honored by the invitation," she said carefully, "but I must tell you that this research was not done alone. My human colleagues were essential partners. If you want me to present, they must be included as well." Dr. Veltar was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. The assembly will welcome your research partners." After the call ended, the bridge erupted in celebration. Yuna and Gina hugged each other excitedly. Even Sirius Security Chief Hayuk was smiling. "This is incredible," Gina said. "Humans presenting at the Grand Science Assembly. No one will believe it." "They'll believe it," Kira Ish said, "because we'll show them what we can accomplish when we work together." Later that evening, Kira Ish found Captain Minho in the observation lounge, looking out at the swirling colors of the nebula. She joined him at the window. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Answering my distress call? All the complications it's brought?" Minho considered the question seriously. "Never. You've made us all better people. You've opened doors for humanity that we never even knew existed. But more than that, you've shown us that the universe is bigger and more wonderful than we imagined." "You saved my life," Kira Ish said, "but you gave me something more important than life. You gave me purpose again." "You gave us something too," Minho replied. "You showed us that intelligence and wisdom aren't about what species you come from. They're about curiosity, dedication, and the willingness to keep learning." As they watched the nebula drift past, Kira Ish thought about the message that had started it all. "Anyone, please." She had sent those words into the darkness, not expecting anyone to care. But someone had cared. Someone had come. "Captain," she said, "I've been working on something new. A way to boost our communication system so we can hear distress calls from much farther away." Minho looked at her with interest. "That could save a lot of lives. That's the idea. There might be others out there waiting for someone to answer their call for help." "Then we'll find them," Minho said simply. "That's what we do." The Hanul's dream continued its journey through the nebula, carrying cargo and crew toward new adventures. But now it carried something else as well. Proof that the barriers between species could be crossed with understanding, respect, and simple kindness. In the months that followed, other species began to reach out to humanity. Trade agreements were signed. Scientific collaborations began. Cultural exchanges flourished. The galaxy slowly began to see humans not as primitive newcomers, but as valuable partners who brought their own unique strengths to the community of intelligent species. And it all started with a simple decision. When someone called for help, good people answered regardless of who was calling or why. Kira Ish had been abandoned in deep space, alone and forgotten by her own people. But when a human vessel answered her call, she discovered that home wasn't about what species you belonged to. Home was about finding people who valued you, who believed in your dreams, and who would stand beside you as you reached for the stars. The universe was vast and often lonely, but it was also full of hope. And hope, Kira Ish had learned, was the most human thing of all.